I love the liveliness, the constant feeling of energy.
Definitely the world-class education.
The diversity. Nah, the nightlife.
I would say the people.
For me, it's the stories. My name is Waja, and welcome to Toronto Story Archive. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Toronto Story Archive. Growing up can be a tough gig. There's hormones, puberty, girls or boys depending on your flavor, learning to drive, figuring out how to style hair that is weirdly wiry and straight when short, fluffy at mid-length, and then curls into big ringlets when long. It took me like all the way to university, and then a couple of years before I figured that one out. For reference, check me out on Instagram at @IamWaja. And then of course there's bullying. Middle school for me was just the worst. I didn't get along with, well, almost anyone, really. I remember one day coming back from school, one of the bigger kids said something to me, and I, of course, said something back. I was always quite good at running my mouth. And anyway, we got off the bus, and I just see this guy's arm go back. I'm like halfway across the street now, beating a steady retreat. And then splat. Yogurt on my clothes, yogurt in my hair. Which, I mean, now that I think back on it, is a really strange way to deal with a problem, even for kids. My response, as someone literally half the size of the yogurt thrower, was obviously to continue running my mouth. Anyway, in the end, when I left middle school and high school behind, it was a thank the Lord, good riddance, and no looks back. Now, looking back, in retrospect, I always like to blame some of the bullying I experienced on cultural differences, being terrible at sports, and being far too into Lord of the Rings and Warhammer for most of the cool kids' liking. But if I'm being honest with myself, some of this is also on me. I was a smart kid, and I wasn't afraid to flaunt it. The people who belittled me athletically, I belittled intellectually. With the benefit of hindsight, we can see how our behavior affects those around us. This is in no way an excuse for the bullies of the world, but it certainly lends an element of understanding. Many people say that the world today has become more sensitive in recent history. And on some level, this may be true, but I think in the end that people are people and we're affected by those around us. The biggest difference is that between then and now, the medium to express ourselves has changed. MSN just didn't have the same reach as Twitter. Now, don't get me wrong. This isn't an episode where we get on a call and gripe about how much high school sucked. The reality is, we all have our crosses to bear and our adversity to overcome. The point is that the adversity is, in the end, overcome. As tough as some of my coming of age experiences were, not just in my formative years, but all the way through university, I can safely say that they have made me stronger and more driven as a human being. As John Hurt's War Doctor once said, that's Doctor Who for the non-nerds, non-Whovians out there, great men are forged in fire. Now, while I might not yet be a great man, our guest this week is certainly someone whom I consider great. This week, I have the pleasure of chatting with Ian Amirthanathan. Ian is a law student, a musician, and an opera singer. Fun fact, although Ian hails from Woodbridge, he's currently studying law in the UK. Coming at us from Stoke, England, welcome Ian.
Hey, what's going on, Mo? How are you?
I'm great, Ian. How are you doing? How is life in England, man?
Life in England is definitely not like life in Canada. Let me put it that way.
I mean, okay, I have to ask because I want to know, what is the weather like there? What does it look like outside for you right now?
Actually, you know what? The weather outside right now is very misleading. It's not typical English weather because it's good weather, and
It's not raining.
It's not raining and it's not cloudy. It's actually a beautiful sunny sky. The once in 10 years that it is nice weather here, actually. That's England. That is basically England.
That's fantastic. I mean, for the listeners out there, Ian and I go back. Ian and I were both at Ryerson University in the Ted Rogers School of Management, and I always found Ian to be a motivating and inspiring human being, not just through his work in student associations, but all through his singing, through his interactions, through the way he mentored those around him. And so, on that note, Ian, I want to ask you the one major question that we ask everyone who comes on Toronto Story Archive. What is one thing you love about Toronto?
It has to be the diversity. Toronto has to be now that I've been in England, and now that I grew up in Africa. I went through several countries there, and I moved to Toronto. And but definitely now that I'm away from Toronto, one of the things I certainly miss is the diversity, the multilingual aspect of the city, and just the you know what, the mentality behind the city is a lot more positive and engaging, and I certainly miss that. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So what do you mean that it's more I guess positive and engaging? What does that mean? I mean, I have never actively lived out of country. So I think I only really get snippets of the cultures and the attitudes and the perspectives of different countries that I've visited. So what do you mean by positive and engaging?
Right. So my English mates over here won't like me criticizing them like, but it's very much commonly known that whoever lives in England suffers the English life, and what that means is it's a colloquial term which refers to a very depressing and difficult and arduous sort of journey. That's no, and I'm not even making that up. That's what, when someone says, "Oh, I'm having a tough English life," that's what it means. I don't know whether that's attributable to the country's art, like very long suffering history, or the gloomy weather, but that, it's a very, I'm not to say that, every English person is very depressed, but definitely when you're in Toronto, the one thing, I mean, not even the one thing, the many things that pop out at you are vibrance and innovation, and the even the weather, I mean, is great compared to here. I mean, now don't get me wrong, Toronto weather is definitely not exactly predictable, but it's certainly one thing about the city is it's vibrant, and it's positive. And I know that because I live in a city, especially where the atmosphere isn't known for its vivaciousness. If you
Hmm.
get, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Totally. I mean, I get it, right? The other day I went out for a run and it was pouring outside. I mean, I went outside and the rain was hitting you so hard. It felt like sleet. It felt like hail. But I was not the only runner out there. I wasn't the only one who was still doing things. I was running down the Danforth, and there were people out there who were like, I mean, I'm sure they're being employed to man this game, so they're forced by merit of their purse strings to be upbeat. But they were still out there, and people were playing this marketing game on the Danforth in spite of the weather. The vibrance of the city is known, and it's something that is absolutely, I mean, it's absolutely made it more interesting and more impactful to me. I love this concept of living a tough English life, though.
Oh
I
yeah, no,
mean,
the hard English. That is what they actually call it.
a hard English life.
Yeah, that's how they do it here.
Because I mean, you can joke, right? Like, I mean, I whenever like something unfortunate happens, one of the phrases that I've picked up from my father was that he just would say, "It's a tough life. It's tough out there, man." Right? And I'd be like, "Yeah." I say that to my fiance all the time, and it drives her nuts. Something goes wrong. It's a tough life. It's tough out there, man. But to have it kind of embodied into almost like a national slogan on some level is taking it to a very, very different level.
Yes, that's England. They like to dramatize things. This is the country of Shakespeare, right? So you can't really blame them.
Absolutely. So I guess my next question for you is that, I mean, you're an artist, right? You're a musician, you're a professional operatic singer. So I mean, there's an art scene in every new place you go to, and I've had a couple of people come on to Toronto Story Archive so far and talk a bit about what the music scene is like in Toronto. But you have, I actually even had someone who was from the UK previously, one of the smaller regions of the UK, and she moved to Toronto and had to reboot her singing career. So I guess though you have a unique experience because you moved from Toronto as a singer to the UK. So how have you found that has affected your art? What is the music scene like there? If, as a law student, you've had the opportunity to engage.
Right. Well, to be very honest, I haven't had the great opportunity to explore much. However, I have been connected to a few of the law students here, and the way that the particular program that I'm in, that actually a lot of Canadians go to in the UK,
Hmm.
is called the 2-year fast track, which I think England is one of the only countries that offers that, in terms of like a fast track law degree. And it's kind of it's interesting because the students that you meet are pretty much like you, and some of them are a little older than me, like they're senior students, and one of them is a former English punk rocker who was
Oh,
touring for
wow.
25, 30 years. And I competed in a mooting competition, where I met him. We were competitors, and we connected over Facebook, started speaking cordially, and I just found out that he was a musician too. And I said, "Hey, Mick, I'm really looking forward to some music. Like, can you take me anywhere?" He was like, "Why don't you come to my
Hmm.
studio?" So I went to a
Oh,
studio which
nice.
casually 5 minutes from where I live, and
Hmm.
yeah, we just started playing, and it's really interesting. The influence of the atmosphere, even though we both are playing, English sounding music and rock and all that,
Hmm.
it's much different than jamming with someone in Toronto. And I do mean that quite literally, because you're influenced by the atmosphere, you're influenced by the people when you're making me as a musician. And his tone, and even though I played with rockers before, and it's just a different sound. And it's great to have that sort of diversity. Yeah. So that was
Absolutely.
yeah, that was one of my best. That's one of my best musical experiences here. And another one that I can speak on is I meditate a lot. So
Hmm.
what I would do is, one of the great things, if you're not two things in England, if you're not going into a crowded area, you're going to some sort of farm where there are a lot of horses and sheep, and some sort of lake. There has to be a lake or a river.
Of
Um,
course.
there's there's this one really beautiful park right next to my house, and I go there often, and I'll just listen to whatever's on my Spotify, and I'll just meditate, and it's great. So I've connected with
Hmm.
music on those two levels, I would say.
I mean, that's important, right? We all have our passions. We all have those things that drive us and make us better and make us better people. And I find it really interesting that with yours as music, you're able to immediately note the difference in influence coming from Toronto to England. I find this, I guess, specifically interesting because you go from here to like Latin America, for example, or when I was traveling in Mexico recently, or when I go to like Spain or Morocco or something like that, and the differences in music are stark. There are very clear lines between music here that even a layman like myself can see, but you would imagine going to England, with Canada previously being an English colony, that the music would be very, very similar. But it's just very interesting that you could pick up those cultural differences, not only listening to it but also playing it, and the relationship with music changes.
Yes. Yeah. I 100% would agree with that. I would say, a lot of the English musicians that have come over to North America, we just have our own interpretation of that music. And for example, like Pink and Led Zeppelin,
Hmm.
um, right? You listen, you when I was jamming with Mick here, it's just what I mean by that is, um the way that you communicate with singing, and the way that you communicate as band members, it's a different vibe. And
Hmm.
I guess I'm not sure how to articulate this properly, but the way that I finally understand how an English person would accentuate on certain tones, like Brexit, for example. That's been a huge political thing that's uh, resonated across the country. There have been a lot of rebel group. I won't go and so intensely call them rebel groups, but there have been a lot of
Hmm.
musical groups out of London, especially in the south of England, that have
Hmm.
shown their distaste and displeasure towards that sort of. But where I live, it's kind of the area that tipped it in favor of leaving.
Hmm.
You kind of get that complete different it's a completely different set of people here, and that has to be reflected in the atmosphere of I mean, to me, music resonates from your emotions. Resonates from the mind, and that stark difference in the people is hugely reflected where I am, which is directly in the, the middle of England, so to say. So, oh yeah, to go back to what you were saying, absolutely. You can definitely tell whereas in Toronto, we our music is a lot more, how do I say this? Uh in terms of like the political atmosphere, I mean there are a
Hmm.
lot of things going about, the Rob Ford and we have a mayor who smokes pot and all that stuff, but that's yeah, that's as political, I guess, as Toronto's more like a meme.
No, it's true. It's true. I get what you're saying, and it's interesting. It makes sense. It makes sense, right? Like you said, music comes from your emotions, and I guess with Brexit and with a lot of the political elements, the socio-political elements going on in the world today, that would affect it. That would affect the very emotional core of the music, of the sound, and of the impression that people are generating. So, I mean, as a law student, right? Because I mean, we've mentioned Brexit. So I'm curious as to the ramifications of something like Brexit for a Canadian law student or Canadian law students, or even, I mean, people coming in from out of country who want to come to school in the UK. Like, how much of an effect does that have? Does it have an effect?
Mo, that is a fantastic question. One of the okay, so Brexit has actually sparked numerous areas of legal studies in my law school, Staffordshire University. Um,
Hmm.
Before I get into this, I'll just open with the preamble introduction that Brexit as a whole has completely enriched my understanding of the law in general, not even just English law. To get into it on a very, just a layman, just a basic level, the implications that the UK has had of being part of the EU is that EU law has been prevalent in the UK. That mean so there
Okay.
the which means that EU law triumphs over the parliamentary law that's created by the UK Parliament, as
Hmm.
long as the EU is a member. But when Theresa May was attempting to trigger Article 50, she's not a member of Parliament. She's a member of the executive. So the impact of triggering Article 50 is that the law will be substantially changed. And someone who is a member of the executive branch, which is Theresa May, she doesn't have the power to substantially change the law. That power can only come from Parliament. And this relates to the constitutional principle of the separation of powers. And the separation of powers is hugely adapted in the U.S. They have a very strong separation of powers. Canada has and we respect the separation of powers well, but obviously it originated from uh, the the English study. And this ultimately, why does the separation of powers matter? Why should it matter if uh, Theresa May shouldn't be allowed to trigger Article 50 instead the Parliament? It all resonates down to the most important legal principle, for me, the constitutional legal principle, which is the rule of law. And the rule of law basically respects that there should be no arbitrary governmental decisions. Um,
Hmm.
Government should not have so much power concentrated in it that you would see unbiased and unfair judgment. And the executive branch of government, which is where Theresa May belongs, they are not supposed to create the law. It just so happens that their position is very influential in lawmaking, but their role is to administer and enforce the law. However, Parliament
Okay.
creates the law. So it would be synonymous with how the king in England used to arbitrarily make the law, enforce the law, do whatever he wanted. But with the
Hmm.
separation of powers and the rule of law, we've moved away from that. And as a Canadian law student, uh, this as a law student in general, this is just the most incredible time to learn these constitutional principles because you have case decisions. For example, the Miller case, which was decided in early 2017, it's live and happening. The last 17 years have been the most groundbreaking in the study of English law altogether. And Brexit plays such a central role in me understanding that. And I was very, very lucky at the time that I decided to study the law. So it also, at the end of the day, you know me, like I'm
For
fair
sure.
as fair. That's my kind of philosophy, and understanding the separation of powers at this very contextual level and understanding the rule of law. And one day, my interest of becoming a politician, it just enriches your my understanding so much more. And when we all, I mean, to all the listeners, and we living in North America and that sort of thing, you can relate to Trump and all of
Hmm.
the a lot of the problems that have occurred have pretty much are very synonymous with what's happening in England with Theresa May. Like, he was trying to trigger, well, not trigger, but he was trying to pass these executive orders, and the exact duplicate of that is basically the prerogative powers in England when Theresa May was trying to trigger Article 50, and the Supreme Court in the States ruling that Trump doesn't have the powers to do such thing goes back to this separation of powers and this respect of the rule of law. So I wouldn't have definitely appreciated that before this whole Brexit and constitutional story, but yeah.
Okay, I mean that makes sense, right? Even when you look at the law in Canada, and I'm not so well schooled on law and how law works in Canada, the U.S., or of course the U.K. But I mean, when we look at how laws and how the Constitution and all that was created, it was created some time ago, like a very long time ago. So I guess you're getting this interesting insight as all of these things that have been almost taken for granted, understood as this is the way it is, come bubbling to the surface. And now they have to be kind of reinvestigated, re-understood, re-looked at all over again. Because in a very real way, Brexit, Trump's interactions with government and with his own population are calling into question a lot of the ways in which we were, and a lot of the ways in which we operate, and the way that we understand government to operate. So I
Absolutely.
guess I guess following up to that, I want to take it to almost a bit of a micro level and say, so this is high level in law. This is what's happening right now. When everything shakes out for you, or let's say for me or another Canadian who's decided, you know what, I'm going to go to law school, and I'm going to go to law school in the UK. In terms of on a micro level, what that person will see going from Canada to the UK, how will their experience change from, for instance, how what your experience was, or do you have an insight into how, or a speculation onto how that might change as Brexit continues to roll forward?
Well, going to your first question on how it feels to move from Canada, knowing that you want to be a lawyer. Well, the primary reason why you would choose this path is assuming that you couldn't get into one of the 15 schools in Canada, which is what happened to me.
Hmm.
The reason why I couldn't get into a Canadian university, apart from it being very difficult, was primarily because my grades in university weren't that great. That is a whole story that we can get into after. But and I'd certainly be happy to talk about that as well. But going to this question, yeah, one of the reasons why you would go to the UK in general is, well, this is where the common law started, isn't it? And
Hmm.
Australia, Commonwealth nations, they all adopt this law. A student in my particular position who would want to go to the UK, that's their reason. There are a lot of fears, I would say, because your degree is looked at a lot differently from a Canadian, well, assuming that you want to practice the law when you return to Toronto or return to Canada. You would have to go through the NCA exams, and then you would have to go write the bar exam, and then even before that, you would have to find some articling. And if you're so lucky to get through all those three hurdles, which is about a year and a half of tough, intensive studying and training, then you have to go and find someone willing to employ you. And that's where the real difficulty is, because now you're not only competing against all the graduates from the 15 law schools in Canada, but all the, hundreds and close to, I don't know if it's thousands, but a large number of people who also have international degrees just like you. So now moving into your second question, it truly helps that you can have any sort of cutting edge or knowledge that puts you on top of any one of the others who are graduating. And for me, it's certainly, I mean, I haven't decided which area of law that I want to go into, but with the mindset that I want to one day go into politics, my understanding of constitutional law and certainly this Brexit story, 100% is a selling factor for me, because it certainly has been hammered into my university. My university, particularly why I chose it, is because it stresses on research. And I would say to any of the listeners who are thinking of whether it's a Canadian law school or a UK an international law school, research is one of the biggest things that I would say you focus on, because that's what I've started to realize is everything is based on credibility. Whatever you say, whatever legal principle, whatever your case, it has to have some sort of precedent. It has to have some sort of backing, and that's what you learn as a law student in my position. Just verifying your facts, proving what you're saying is, and not the only, but one of the best ways to get at that is by doing good research. So to answer your question, those are the two areas that I would say, you're definitely nervous, but try to try to pick that sort of edge through law school that I think that will help you differentiate yourself.
I mean, you have to find your advantages, right? You have to find your advantages, whatever the circumstances are, and however those circumstances has changed you. And it's interesting because the world that we live in has changed significantly. The capacity to just go to another country and go to school there the investment barrier required in terms of like time, accessibility, etc., has changed significantly even in the last few years. And every ounce of international experience we get not only changes how we interact with our work and whatnot when we're back home, but I guess it changes our very personality and our emotional state and how we interact with other people. I mean, if we're, taking things back a little bit, you said you moved here from Africa, was it, to Toronto when you were young?
Yep. 7 years old. 19. I was born in 92, so family moved in September of 99 from Harare, Zimbabwe, to Toronto. Yep.
And so once you were here, what was that like? I mean, because most people, or I don't know about most people, I don't have the metrics, but many people who say I moved here from, or I'm from here from, they moved over as a baby, so they have no memories. They developed for all intents and purposes as a Canadian with the cadence, the dialogue, the perspectives that are all highly North American. Myself, I have South African heritage. I have the potential to be a South African citizen and whatnot, but I was born here. I was born in Mississauga. So my South African heritage is that heritage, but it is without the experience of actually living there. So how did that, I guess, change your experiences growing up, moving to Canada and to Woodbridge, I believe, at the age of 7?
Yeah. So it's quite a story with me, because I guess I would say I never had a true home, even in Africa, because I was born in Botswana. I was born in Gaborone, Botswana. Never actually lived there for a significant amount of time that I can remember. We moved to Accra, Ghana, when I was 3. Then we moved to Zimbabwe when I was 5. And then actually, while we moved from Zimbabwe to Canada, my dad moved to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam, and we would visit
Oh,
him there
wow.
on vacations. So I never really had a niche sort of childhood. I can say that was one particular place. It was more so a collection of meeting new people, moving all the time, always going on family, trips. That's how African life is. I mean, for us especially. So
Hmm.
having that sort of, and it was really, I'm an emotional person as it is, but with someone like me, the best thing is to have a routine, is to have a system. And in my childhood, up until I was 7 years old, I never really had that. And probably the most daunting experience was not only moving outside of, just an African country to another, but was moving outside of the continent for the first time in my life. And when I even remember it in Zimbabwe, to my childhood friends, I was just telling them, they were asking me, what's Canada like? I was like, well, it snows there, I think. And that's really like the best that I could describe it, and
Hmm.
moving to Toronto was actually, at first, it was amazing because Zimbabwe at the time when we left was in political turmoil. Mugabe was just about flexing his muscles and beginning that political tirade that sent the country into the terrible situation that it's had to endure for the past while. And we just left at the good, at the acceptable time. But coming to Toronto was actually great. I was with family. My cousins visited us every now and then, but now we got to see them every day. I got to be with my grandparents. We actually lived at my grandparents for the first 2 years, and
Hmm.
I went straight to school. That's where difficulty started, I would say, because like you said, the colloquialisms from moving from one place complete different atmosphere. It's just completely different. And to add to that, I remember at the start of our conversation, you asked me what was the one thing that I miss about Toronto. Well, I said it was multicultural, but it was that multilingualism. But when I moved to Woodbridge, it's a completely, it's dominated by Italians. And that now it's slow, even 17 years later, it's getting a lot more multicultural than it was. But literally in 1999, my brother, my mom, my dad still lived in Africa at the time, but the three of us were literally the pioneers of Woodbridge. We were the
Oh,
first.
wow.
We no for sure. I can verify. We were literally the first non-Italian, like South Asian, living in our area. And
Hmm.
at school was probably the most difficult for me. I mean, didn't really the first few weeks were absolutely horrific. I know that you were saying at the beginning, the introduction that you gave, like that story about how you were bullied with the yogurt and all that. My situation was purely racial. I was the only non-white kid, and kids didn't want to touch me because they didn't want to get cooties.
Oh, of course.
I had no friends. No one wanted to play with me at lunch and recess. I would run home from school every day. And it was actually the best because I got to spend time with my brother, who himself was 4 years my senior, going to the same school, St. Francis. And
Hmm.
I had no idea what he was going through. He was getting it worse because he was in grade eight, but he was actually a grade set. He was 12 years old in grade eight because he skipped a grade. So they definitely they used to like can his lunch, and we were the two brown kids, and it was really tough. I only lasted 4 or 5 months there, and we had to move because I couldn't handle it. Went to another
Hmm.
school in like the Bathurst area. Same thing happened. The teacher, I think one of I forget her name, but she actually sent me to another, like with the ESL, like teacher with that student, and just so that she can speak to the class to be nice to me before I had even met any of them. And it was kind of like fake friends. And for a 7-year old who had never really had a solid, even in myself, I never had a solid backing. It was just one bad experience after another. and I kind of just I hated life. Like, I mean, I know it's just an 8-year-old or 7-year-old, but my mom's a Montessori school teacher. She'll tell anyone that a person's childhood is really what helps shape and fortify their later. That's where you really develop. That's where you start your core principles. When you suffer later on in your life, or
Hmm.
you go through experiences, you kind of like the childhood memories, or those are what you tap into, I would say, without subconsciously. Those are the experiences that you tap into, and for me, tapping into those were just it's tough because those are the like tough memories in my life, and you wouldn't expect that because Toronto is known to be multiculturalism. Multicultural, but again, this was now Wood. I do have to give Woodbridge a lot of credit. I, I've certainly embraced it over the years. It started as a very like sad story with me, like just moving through like several different schools before finally settling in at Our Lady of Fatima, and then the opera started, and opera would never have entered into my life if it wasn't for the Italians. So I've had a love-hate
Hmm.
relationship with the Azzurri, but I would say it ended on a love note with them. So yeah, they pretty much become part of my life. Italian. I speak Sicilian dialect, so not
Hmm.
fluently, of course, but yeah. So it's it's a happy ending, I would say, and it still have many letters to write in it. So
For sure. I mean, I think there's a difference between, Toronto's been called a multicultural mosaic, a melting pot, a hugely diverse, one of Canada's most diverse cities, all of those things. But everything has its roots. Everything has its evolution, right? And between like when we were growing up, when I was growing up, I'm 26 now, right? That's that's a good number of years, right? For things to change and adapt and grow, and for greater immigration, and for greater diversity to grow within the city. So I mean, everything has its evolution, and I completely agree with you, right? It is the childhood memories and the childhood experiences that really shape the way we interact and connect with people, and interact and connect with the experiences around us. I mean, I can say unequivocally that your experience growing up was much harsher than mine was. So I mean, hats off to you, man, for taking that, moving forward, and growing from it.
that's the tough English life, isn't it, brother?
That's the tough English life. That is definitely the tough English life.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, obviously you stuck around, right? Obviously you stuck around. You went from living in Woodbridge, getting into opera, struggling with that lack of stability, into university, and you went to Ryerson University, which is where we met. How did that change your perspectives and perceptions of Toronto as a city now that you're in the heart of it?
Uh, it completely changed my mindset. I honestly thought that Toronto was the Italian city until I went to Ryerson University. You know what I mean? Like, if I had to have a Skype call in 2009 before 2009, 2010, before I went, and I had a Skype call with some of my friends in Africa, and they asked me to describe Toronto, I would say, yeah, it's an Italian city.
Hmm.
But going to Ryerson completely made me embrace downtown Toronto in every way. Ryerson is the epitome of downtown living. Yeah, I mean U of T doesn't have that sort of cultural. I don't know why. I would say Yonge and Dundas Square has a very impactful role on that. It's
Hmm.
just to if the way that I would uh, draw a comparison is with London. Whenever you think of going to London, you think of going to Big Ben, you think of going to Hammersmith Bridge, all of those different like cultural attract. When you think of Ryerson, you think of Yonge and Dundas Square, you think of the Dundas subway. That's just like a congregational spot.
For sure.
A lot of cultural things happen there. For me particularly, it had to be the student life, and that again has to do a lot with the energy that comes with being from Ryerson, downtown Toronto sort of campus. Um, to speak on one of the things that I would say really embraced Toronto for me was the Ted Rogers Management Conference. I mean, I was a member of that team for 2 years as like in an executive role. And one of our selling fact, because I one of the years I was the public relations guy. We've actually
Hmm.
brought over the first ever international student to the conference from the States, and we were trying to bring in some dignitaries and politicians. And the biggest thing that we said, even to the Canadian students from outside of Ryerson, was that this is a multicultural city. This is a multicultural, diverse experience. It's not, it's flowery words, I get it, but you'll see that once you're here. And it's reflective. Again, it goes back to how we were talking about how even the music is different from England to Toronto. I mean, just Toronto is just unique in that way, because a lot of people say that Canadians are nice, or the polite people. You get to see that. You get to see the full picture of it. How I mean, I don't know if this is the right mode to discuss particular stories, but one that comes to mind was one of my friends, Brian, from university. He was going into the subway one time in like Scarborough area, and this lady was getting mobbed. And he, out of
Oh
the only,
wow.
yeah, it was like 9 p.m. at night. He was the only person that stood up on like that train and like actually went defended her, called the cops. That's a and this is a born and bred Torontonian, Brian. That's what it's like to be. I would say a classic Torontonian. That's our atmosphere. We're helpful, kind
Hmm.
people. I know we live in a busy city and we all have our own independent lives and our own journeys and we're doing our own thing, but um, we're definitely we're one of the more friendlier and more open individualistic people. And you really get to see that. I really got to see that entering Ryerson University for sure.
I mean, it's easy to say the words, right? It's easy to say that Canada is diverse, that Canadians are nice, that Toronto's multicultural, right? These are all the things that you put on the GTA ad copy, right? As someone in marketing, this is all your copywriting things. This is how you sell Toronto, sell the city to other people. But there's a big difference between hearing the words and actually seeing it in action. And that's part of what you've described here. And I think that's part of what's important, that we see this going on a regular basis, right? Everything from just borrowing someone a phone and having the trust to be able to hand someone your phone and borrow them a phone to make a call, all the way through to the other end of the spectrum, which is defending someone else when they're being mistreated, be it on the subway or otherwise. Seeing that in action, I think, that's really, I believe, what makes Toronto special, or a big part of what makes Toronto special. So I think I have two last questions for you, and they might lead one into the other, but because you're in the unique situation as one of our guests who hails from Toronto, or who hails from the city, but is now living abroad. What is one thing, or the one thing you miss about Toronto the most?
My family and my closest friends. When I think of Toronto, I think of home. My whole life I've been, traveling from here and there, especially in my childhood. But though it was a tough arrival when I arrived in 1999, and the hardest thing to leave. The, Coming to university in the UK was emotional for many reasons, and it was because this was the first. It was the first time in my life that I was living on my own independently from my family, but I wasn't even within reach of them. It's not like, you're
Hmm.
moving from Woodbridge and you're getting a condo downtown. It's you're moving 3,000, you're moving halfway around the world. And I won't call myself like a mama's boy or anything. I'm definitely not, but I'm definitely a family guy. And my family and my friends are central to who I am. and
Hmm.
not being able to see them every day takes a toll on you emotionally, especially when you're going through one of the most difficult challenges of your life, and that's, where you not only have to compete against the people in England, well, in your own classroom, but know that you have to compete against potential and eventual graduates across an entire country in Canada, and you have to do a good job of it, and you have to, you're looking after yourself independently. You're doing your own laundry. I learned to cook for myself, and I've become the culinary master who, invented the jambalaya. Yeah. You really become independent, I would say. But not the being miss the thing that you miss the most is the thing that embellishes your personality the most. My family and friends, they are who I am, and I try to just represent them every single day. Um, it's incredibly difficult, not having the parental or the guidance that you normally have when you're living at home, and people when they live with their parents, they that goes unnoticed, and it really it turns into sourness when you don't get to go get you don't get decisions to turn in your favor because you're living at home. But when you're living on your own, you really have to exercise good judgment, and you have to be your own parent. And um the the thing, like I said, the thing that you miss the most becomes the thing that defines who you are. And for me, it has to be my family and my closest friends.
Absolutely. I mean, I could see that, as tough as it sometimes is to live and interact regularly with your family, as tough as that can be, the guidance aspect is something that we often take for granted. And I mean, it speaks to your personality and the things that drive you, that the aspect of Toronto you miss the most are the people closest to you, because I mean, you'd think that most people would answer like that, but I think that myself included, the first things that would come to mind would be locational, locational places I like to go, or things I like to see, or food I like to eat. And I guess that leads into the last question that I want to ask you today, Ian, and that is, if you could recommend one place to go or one thing to do in the city, what would that be?
Hmm. Hands down, it would have to be the immersion experience, and I'll explain what that means. When I came to London, well, I don't live in Lyle, obviously, I live in Stoke, but when you land in England, you first normally go through London.
Hmm.
I spent about a week, and one of the experiences that you do is you get randomly dropped off by a taxi, or you randomly take the tube somewhere, and you have to do this as a foreigner, and you're not common to the area. You just tell someone, randomly drop me here, and you just explore your way for like a good 3 hours. And that
Hmm.
allows you the unique opportunity to go to places not where you're not planning to go to this place, you're not planning to do this or planning to do that, but in the process of wanting to discover, because you don't know where you are, you end up exploring and learning and embracing. And if I were to recommend any sort of activity to a Torontonian, it would literally be go to the any sort of the downtown subway gets criticized a lot, but it's still a subway. You can just take it anywhere and tell someone, name a random station, and tell them and then start at wherever station you're at and go to that random station, get out of that station, and then walk. Uh, Toronto is so. When people ask me in England to describe Toronto, I literally just say you can do whatever you want, wherever you want, at whatever time you
Hmm.
want, because that's what Toronto is. And it embellishes this experience, this immersion experience, even more, that you get to see we were talking about the effect of buzzwords earlier. You really get to see into action how diverse Toronto is by doing this sort of activity. So if I were to recommend anyone to do that, so I would recommend to do that. Is to just go and explore without knowing where you want to go or what you want to do, and let the path take you.
100%. That is easily one of the most unique, and I guess in a very real way, holistic and all encompassing recommendations that we've received so far on Toronto Story Archive. Thank you so much, Ian, for calling in all the way from England, man. It has been an absolute pleasure having you.
I really appreciate you thinking of me, Mo.
Absolutely. And that's a wrap for this week's episode of Toronto Story Archive. Each episode, we bring on guests from Toronto to tell us a story, any story about their life in the city. Our commitment is to not sell, pitch, or bore you. Our goal is to amuse, excite, and at the end of the day, entertain you with stories told by the many voices Toronto has to offer. If you have a story to share, shoot me an email to submissions@torontostoryarchive.com. My name is Mo Waja, and thank you. Thank you for tuning in to Toronto Story Archive.